We had pasta cookers in our facilities that were, um, think of like a regular pasta pot, but ours were 10-foot diameter. And we had baskets on a crane we would lower down in there. So we would load all the pasta. We had a trolley with a crane.
Shane, appreciate you taking the time to hop on and chat with me today. And one of the first things that I always got to ask and start things off with is, how did you fall into food?
Oh man, it was kind of almost on accident, really. When I was a real young guy, teenager, 15, 16, all my buddies were cutting lawns and doing all that sort of thing. And I didn't really like working that hard. So, of course, I went and took a restaurant job. I think I was 15 years old and took my first job was at a LongHorn Steakhouse. And it was so long ago. My primary job was sweeping up peanut hulls off the floor because remember way back then they used to throw the peanuts on the floor. So I kind of got in the restaurant thing after school and was doing a little bit of everything, front of the house stuff. They had me doing prep work and I kind of learned a little bit about the restaurant business doing that. So much so that when I was 17, I was offered to go and open up a store down in Destin, Florida, at the beach, and was supposed to be gone for a month, and wound up staying down there for 10 years, and worked with them for a long time. Got to be up into management with them, and when they went corporate, of course, I decided I didn't want to stick around for that. So I was kind of at a time when I was 25 and wondering what I was going to do with my life, and decided I was out of the restaurant business and out of food forever, and going to figure out what I was going to do. So I came to visit my father and was going to stay with him for a couple days and then go out west. And Hurricane Katrina hit, so I could not travel because there was no gas. And so it was
Oh,
kind of one of those things where I met some friends of my father's while I was staying around, and they said, "Hey, you know a lot about food from being in the restaurant business. We just bought a brand, a frozen meal brand, and we don't know anything about prepared food. Would you go consult with us for a couple of weeks and and go check out our co-packer?" And I was like, "Yeah, great. What's a co-packer?" I had no idea about the industrial food side, so I wound up taking a position with them, going up to their co-packer. Was supposed to stay for a couple of weeks, stayed there for 18 months, and then came back to Georgia and helped them build a plant. So I learned pretty much everything there was about industrial large scale meal production. And we built out our first plant in Athens, Georgia in 2009. And ran that business for, I went from being a consultant, like a low paid young hourly guy, to being the general manager of a company called Golden Cuisine. We were selling about $20 million worth of senior meals a year. So I was in charge of all those operations for a number of years. We made 80 different SKUs of medically tailored meals before they were even called that. And so I wound up running that operation for quite a long time. The original owner sold it for a lot of money, and I went with the new owners and built another plant in South Georgia and continued on my role as GM for them for a period of time. And I really love being in the plant, love working with the people. I love, all the food making technology, but unfortunately I had some really serious health issues. And had to leave that position. It was one of those things where, whenever you have a really solid plan, sometimes things intervene. And I was kind of forced to leave being in the plant all the time. But the um, good news is I kind of became a subject matter expert on prepared meals. So when I was trying to decide what I was going to do next, the people that I'd been working with packaging and with equipment and that sort of thing said, "Hey, um, we know you don't want to work 15-hour days anymore in a plant. Come and work with us." And so I've been doing uh, packaging and equipment ever since. In addition to some other things. I have a company called Dharma Food Group that I own, and we do product development, project management, and launch support, and those sort of things for brands. And I still make medically tailored meals. We can kind of go into how that came kind of full circle. But now,
Yeah.
instead of running the plant myself, I utilize a network of co-packers to make that product for me. And I'm still in packaging and equipment, just with some other folks. So it's a
Yeah, we're gonna get a nerd out a little bit on
yeah, yeah,
packaging and MAP, modified
yep,
atmospheric packaging. People are gonna be like, wait, what? Where are we going with this? Because I had some exposure to it about 3-4 years
mm-hmm,
ago, and now I've really delved into it more and more. It's just very interesting and fascinating, and how much it's part of our everyday life, and people just don't understand
yep,
that it's everywhere. Everywhere. If you really pay attention, you're like, oh, there's something that's had modified atmospheric
mm-hmm.
packaging, or they've done some sort of manipulation to the product. But I first want to ask, what was the learning curve, going from, again, you were in the food, but learning the industry side of things. Now there's a lot more resources. You can go online, with AI, everything else.
Yep.
But how was it then to actually learn the process? Was it the old school way of just being in the factory?
It was the old school way of putting on a smock and a hairnet and some rubber boots. And when I first went in to check out their co-packer, it was kind of a tense relationship. They were having quality issues and that sort of thing. And they said, "Hey, go up there and fix it." But I didn't know how to tell them how to fix it because I was kind of green. So what I had to wind up doing was I went in and worked side by side with every position in the plant. I cooked on the kettles. I would do that for a week. I would work with the folks scaling for a week, and I wanted to understand how every bit of it worked, because when you're in a food plant, it looks like chaos, right? You got this going over here and this going over here, but it's organized chaos. And I wanted to understand how all of that worked. So I went and worked with every position in the place, worked with their chefs, worked with their QA people, and eventually I got really interested in the QA side of things. And that was when, kind of early on, when you could get certificates online. It was kind of in its infancy. So I went ahead and got Haccp certified. I went ahead and got all of that sort of thing done, mainly because I was stuck in a faraway place and had nothing to do on the weekends. But I wanted to know how it worked because I was very interested in it. And I'm kind of a process nerd. I want to know how things work. And I'm kind of a mechanical guy. So I was like, wow, how does this boiler work? How does this generate steam to heat up the kettle to cook the sauce? And so I've always been interested in food, but I got more interested in the technology side of how you take something that you would make in your kitchen at home and make, 300 gallons at a time, and at the
Yeah.
time, we were making between 22 and 26,000 meals a day. And so there was some scale there. So, I wanted to learn how to do all of it, how to grind the meat, how to make the meatloaf, and so I soaked all that up enough to where I was really confident when we went to build out our own plant. Here's kind of how we start from the beginning. And so
Yeah.
it took a
What
lot of
what is
backbreaking
it?
work.
Yeah, I was gonna say, paint a picture. I don't think people understand how big these facilities
Mhm.
are and like the volume that's being cooked. But maybe, I don't know, try and paint a picture of kind of what that looks like. People hear steam kettles and they hear these boilers. I've been lucky enough to
Mhm.
be in a facility, so I know what it is. But maybe just paint a broad stroke picture of kind of what these facilities look like.
Yeah, we did things a little bit differently. We used cryogenic freezing, using nitrogen to actually freeze. So you didn't have to have as big of a footprint, because we would actually go from cooking the food and taking it out hot to plating it hot to it being frozen in about 7 minutes using liquid nitrogen. So, if you imagine, um, take your average restaurant kitchen, and if you think about the scale of things, your average stock pot in a restaurant kitchen is, 10 or 12 quarts, right? Multiply that by, going up to say 300 gallons was our kettle size. The kettles were actually served by mezzanines. So you had to go up the stairs because the kettle, I mean, think about how big it is. It's up on a stand. They were 10 to 12 feet tall. So we had to climb up on mezzanines and actually stand up there. And uh, I've got some photos of that stuff from back in the day. But these cooking vessels are massive, so, we would run 16, 1,800 pounds. If we were making marinara sauce, we would take 50-gallon drums of tomato paste and use a drum unloader, which basically squeezes a 50-gallon drum and shoots tomato paste up in there. Same thing with, diced tomatoes and we would scale spices in 5-gallon buckets. When you're at home making pasta sauce, you got a little bit of oregano. Well, we would weigh it and then carry it up the stairs and dump it in a 5-gallon bucket. So, you know, it's the same process that you do at home. It's just on a much, much larger scale. When we would buy, diced tomatoes, they come in the big white IBC containers like you see people store water in, those 220-gallon containers. So when
Mhm.
you're talking about that much scale, it's it it's similar to what you do in a restaurant or home. It's just so much larger. When um, we had pasta cookers in our facilities that were um, think of a like a regular pasta pot, but ours were 10-foot diameter, and we had baskets on a crane we would lower down in there. So we would load all the pasta. We had a trolley with a crane. You have a lower it down. It cooks for 8 minutes, and you pull it back up and hose it off with a hose to shock it. So food is food, but when you're doing it on such a large um, scale, you just have to have cooler toys. Um,
Yeah.
so that was very fascinating to me to walk in and and see, okay, here we go from ingredient to cooking to plating, to sealing to freezing and then with it being senior meals, what I did, most everything was in a bundle pack, meaning we would put the meals up in the freezer and then come out and make a menu of 7 meals with other items because everything was home delivered to senior citizens. So there was even more complication in that business, I'm still doing that today, just for other groups. If you have um, medical insurance and you're discharged for, say, a heart condition, you'll get 21 meals or 28 meals. And I developed the meals and have them made where they will ship them to your home. It's different now than it used to be. They used to bring them on vans, but now it comes in FedEx. But still involved in that type of nutrition, and still doing a pretty good amount of those meals. But that's kind of turned into a side business, more of a passion project than anything else, just because I enjoy it, and I still do all
Yeah.
the culinary R&D as well. Do all that myself.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about MAP,
Hmm.
what it is. Again, we're going to go down probably the Haccp rabbit hole,
Yeah,
that the dirty, dirty letters that every restaurateur is like, oh, Haccp,
yeah,
I hate it. But maybe talk about what Haccp is to a small degree, right? For anyone that doesn't know, and
mhm.
then touch on MAP and how it really has affected the food system.
Yeah, and I've been now 20 years dealing with modified atmosphere packaging from a product standpoint, and now I actually sell the equipment and do the consulting for people to do modified atmosphere packaging. Basically, what modified atmosphere packaging is you are taking that tray of food that you get at Kroger or Jewel Osco. I mean, everybody's seen the black tray of food, right? What you're doing with modified atmosphere is you're controlling the atmosphere inside of that tray in order to mitigate microbial growth. Meaning, what typically what happens is with modified atmosphere, you have an environment in that tray of oxygen, right? If you have a tray in your kitchen, it's filling with the oxygen that's in the air. What modified atmosphere does is it removes that oxygen, replaces it with another inert gas, which is typically nitrogen, CO2, and then that plastic film goes on top and seals in that nitrogen and CO2 inside that tray in order to keep the food fresher for longer. Um, the technology has been around about 60 years, but it's really been perfected in the last probably the last 15 years. And in refrigerated meals, it is in every refrigerated meal that's out there, whether your listeners know it or not. If you go buy queso dip, or if you go buy guacamole or hummus or any prepared meal that's refrigerated, that modified atmosphere is key to making it last. If you just put the film seal on there, it might stay fresh for 5 or 6 days. If you use modified atmosphere, it can stay fresh for up to 30, depending on the product and and how you do it. Um, and there are some other technologies there that a lot of people are starting to see more, like vacuum skin pack. I don't know if you've seen that, where the film is actually sucked down to the product. Um,
Yeah, I just started seeing that,
mhm.
and I was like, seeing it more. It wasn't as common. I think it's starting to come out more, but yeah, maybe I guess for people to understand, like imagine like a piece of salmon on a plate, and then basically the plastic forms around
Mhm.
it, so there's no. It doesn't have to be in a tray per se. Correct
Yeah.
me if I'm wrong, but that's basically what it is. But how does that work then with the gas flush and food safety? How does that all work?
Well, there's the vacuum skin pack is a little bit different technology. With the whole idea is to remove oxygen because microbes thrive in an oxygen rich environment. With
Right.
with MAP, what you're doing is you're displacing the oxygen and putting in other gases so those microbes don't have anything to feed on. With VSP, what you're doing is removing the entire atmosphere from the entire thing. So you're removing all the oxygen just by basically, sucking the film down to there and having no oxygen in the product. So that pulls a vacuum basically on the entire product. And like if you've got, macaroni, it pulls all the oxygen out of everything and puts a seal to it. So with VSP on different products, you can go a pretty long time. And some of the other benefits to that, and I can share with you some videos and whatnot if you want to put in there with editing, is you can also um, apply product to. You mentioned not necessarily a tray, but even like a board. You can have a piece of paper and put the product right on there. Steaks, seafood. There's a lot of that goes on vacuum skin packaging, and it really protects the food. And you can even display it upright. And I've got some examples in the other room I can grab if your listeners kind of want to see what that looks like. But it's a really a neat technology, and I'm becoming more and more of an expert in it, and I'm working on helping manufacturers to figure out how to do VSP more effectively and MAP as well with the
Yeah.
the technology that I'm selling.
So, what would be the advantage of VSP over, say, traditional map packaging, or why would somebody say, "Okay, I want that VSP moving forward"?
Well, there a couple of things. If you're going to display a product where the product is actually facing out, if you go into your retailer, whether it's an HEB or Publix or whatnot, if you go in the grab and go section, you can actually billboard the product to where you can see the product. If you did that in a regular tray, all the product would fall. Right? VSP holds it in place. One of the other benefits too is when you put it in the microwave, it can actually steam, and the steam from the product will actually balloon up the film itself, so it helps it retain more moisture and helps it cook more evenly. And for a lot of the folks like your meal prep guys that are shipping meals to the home, it protects the meals um, a lot more, and it doesn't move around and shift in transit. So, there are some drawbacks to VSP. It's a little slower to produce because you've got to preheat the film, you've got to vacuum it. It's a little bit slower. The films are more expensive, but there are some definite use case scenarios for it where it makes a lot of sense, especially in things like seafood, where you take a salmon steak, and if you were able to put it on a board or on a aluminum tray and take all the atmosphere out of it, it will keep it fresher for a lot longer.
Yeah, fresh food, right? That's what the name of the game, and nowadays and mass production. I mean, you
Yeah.
have to have we have to have this in order to feed basically everyone around the world.
Well, and if you utilize packaging technologies, you can eliminate a lot of preservatives and things that you don't want in your foods. If you don't have an environment where mold can thrive, if you have a nitrogen rich environment, you don't have to put mold inhibitors into your product. You don't have to put all these preservatives and all this stuff that has been proven that it's not good for you. Where nitrogen is inert, it's not going to hurt you. It's not going to do anything detrimental to you. So you can have the food as close to being from the farm as possible without all the extra processing. So if you utilize certain technologies to preserve food, you don't have to you don't have to have all the bad stuff in there. And I think we've gone down a road as Americans in the last 50, 60 years of just putting all this junk into food, and we're finally starting to wake up
Mhm.
and realize that you don't have to have it in there. If you utilize freezing or with refrigerated, if you utilize a modified atmosphere, you can take all that crap out of the food that's going to wind up in your body. So it's
Yeah,
really exciting.
you mentioned farmers. Are you working with farmers now more, or are they the big guys? Are they looking at this technology to incorporate into their operations, or are they still kind of taking it down the supply chain and still selling off the raw goods to a secondary?
There's been a big push in the entire industry to go more fresh and to work with agriculture producers of the last few years. You see a lot of a lot of a shift in the ag community, and um, to doing more fresh things. And you've also seen a lot of hydroponic operations being grown, and people are getting more health conscious. And so I think that now the shift is even in prepared meals, it has gone to be more farm to table. And I think that's a good thing. We're homestead people. We grow all of our own vegetables and do all of our own things here at my house, and that's important. You probably hear a rooster or a peacock in the background on the noise there, but I think our food system, if you utilize smart technology, does not have to have, we don't have to bring broccoli from China. We don't have to, we don't have to do all of, these things as cost cutting measures that, that we used to. So that I think that we're going to see healthier food in the next few years because the consumers demand it, and finally, the government is starting to get behind it a little bit, and I think that we can do better food with smarter agriculture, with new technology in agriculture, and new technology in how we process our food. I mean, and so I think it's a really a renaissance in what we're going to see in the next 10 years in our entire food system.
Yeah, I think it'll be really exciting to see some of the vertical farming really take
Hmm.
off. I know up here in Chicago, there's I think it's Mighty Vine tomatoes. It is that they do. I think some
Hmm.
indoor agriculture, and it's really cool because you can get these awesome little cherry
Oh
tomatoes
yeah,
year round.
yeah,
And they taste phenomenal. My kids love them, and they're just better than having to go canned or something that's like you said, modified or picked so early in its growing
yep,
season that you're not getting that 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 flavor that you would
yeah,
expect from
yeah.
fresh quality food.
And there's been a lot of folks like you mentioned, people like Gotham Greens and Bright Farms and some of these other folks that are doing more indoor agriculture and are doing hydroponics and having other technologies, and even regular traditional agriculture is going is going smarter. I mean, I live in middle
Mm.
Georgia. We're soybean and peanut country here, and the yields are getting better on those crops without having to use all the GMOs, and they're smarter with how they apply pesticides, smarter with how they do the entire growth system. I mean, we've really come a long way, whether people realize it or not. A lot of people don't think you know about farms as being how you get fed. People think you get lettuce from the grocery store, right? But there's a lot of things in the background that are really impacting our systems. And there's been a bigger focus on more local and more regenerative agriculture too, and we're seeing that a lot. I'm a member of the Georgia Department of Agriculture's Georgia Grown program, and we have symposiums every year where we talk about how smart agriculture is really going to impact our food system, and it's been kind of a rebirth in how we do that the last few years. It's been good to see, and I think it's going to continue.
Yeah, what are some of those things those farmers are doing? Things that you guys talk about for the future. What are people doing to be more sustainable, to be turn maybe some of these standard practices to more regenerative?
I think we're almost going backwards in a way to where they're looking at regenerative agriculture like we did in, the 18th century, right? You rotate out. Okay, I'm going to graze chickens here today, and then I'm going to move them to another pasture, and I'm going to graze pigs here, and here's why, and then I'm going to plant a cover crop. And instead of trying to control nature uh, through the magic of modern chemistry, which we've been doing, we did the entire 20th century. We sprayed DDT and we did all this stuff. You're finding out that you can do it organically and do it sustainably, but also do it at scale. Because you're not, just completely destroying the land and having to, refertilize it. Because if you're rotating out how you do things and how you graze animals and how you grow crops on that same piece of land, you can really take you know, a compact farm and put out more pounds of protein and more pounds of vegetables, just by utilizing techniques that were forgotten a long time ago. There's a um, I don't know if you've ever read Joel Salatin's stuff or seen any of his things about regenerative
Mm-mm.
agriculture. I recommend you look that up. He's got there was a documentary about his farm up in Virginia that came out a couple months ago. He's doing really great things. Um, White Oak Pastures here in Georgia has got him Will and Jenny Harris down there. They have a fantastic um, integrated regenerative farm where now they're doing their own beef processing on site and those sort of things. And it just really helps our food system. And I think, food preservation technology can also help with that too, right? If you're making, organic meat that doesn't have all the ick in it, but you can pack it
Mm-mm.
and make it to where you can, slaughter that animal and process it here in Georgia and be able to ship it to you in Chicago and it still have, 25 days of shelf life on it. Those things all playing together in order to make it a more sustainable food system, and it's good to see.
Yeah, I love it. I work with a farm down in southern Indiana. They do the same thing, regenerative farm. The processing plant is literally attached to basically the logistics side. Literally, there's a little hallway that they connect,
Yep.
and it literally is brought in from the farm down the street, gets slaughtered, same day, and then ready to go, and then they use vacuum sealing technology, and you've got an easy 30 days with a solid
Yep.
vacuum, and they're not using going crazy on the technology, but you're getting a high quality peak product that animals not stressed. You can just taste the difference.
You
It's
can.
like
You can.
the animal lived a happy, healthy life, and when you eat it, you just feel more fulfilled. You don't feel like you need to eat, half a pound or three quarters of a pound. You can eat a good quarter pound. You're like, I feel good, especially when you add, some fresh vegetables or fresh fruit to that
Yep.
meal. It doesn't take a whole lot. And then now all of a sudden you start to change your biochemistry, and then you don't need as much food, which then impacts the whole cycle of the food process, right? Now we're not intaking these massive meals that are half a pound to a pound of food. And we're getting back to, I believe, what we should be. And I think, like you said, it's moving back in time where
Mhm.
we eat what was appropriate for our bodies.
Yeah. And here at our home, we grow all of our own vegetables. I don't know if you can see the garden out the back window there, but we've got a pretty massive garden. And if you take a heirloom tomato, like a Cherokee Purple or something like that, and you cut into that, and you cut into a Walmart tomato, it's almost like they're not the same species of plant. I mean, I'm so used to, especially here in the summertime. We eat tomato sandwiches and just we got more tomatoes we know to do with. We're giving them away up and down the road. But I was somewhere traveling the other day and got a sandwich with a tomato on it. I was like, ick. It's not even the same in the same class. And I think you know with using high technology, but also using heritage practices in how we produce the food, we can do better. We can really kind of carry the whole food system forward where you're going to make healthier individuals because we've really backslid, on that for years and years. I mean, especially kids nowadays just eat too much junk, and I think that and we did when I was a kid too. I mean, I grew up on Little Debbie snack cakes, but maybe we can find a better way forward. And that's kind of the hope with technology and food processing.
Well, it's a happy medium, right? I think there you can have some gluttonous and some enjoyment in your
You
life
can,
with,
yeah.
those products, but as long as you balance it out, I believe personally that you can still live a good life and have a nutritious diet when you just don't, again, indulge in those
Yeah.
things every day, all the time. And I have found personally when I don't consume those things with the highly addictive additives that I don't want them. I'm not
Yeah.
craving sweets all the time. I'm really in like I want a piece of fruit. I don't know why. I just if it's gonna fill me up. I've gotten really into dried fruit as of late. I do a lot of dried fruit
Hmm.
bars, and it's just like that's my dessert. I don't need ice cream. I don't need snack cakes. I don't need candy. Give me a couple dried fruit bars, and I've got my sweet tooth fixed, and it's also helping kind of round out and fill up myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's how you think about things. You know, those sweets and those sort of things. I mean, it's a dopamine hit, right? I mean, you know, it's just like it's just like taking drugs or alcohol or something for some people. But you know, you can shift the way you think about food and what you're used to, and get the same enjoyment out of a apricot that you can out of a a Nutty Buddy bar. It's just all in how you think about it. You know. Um,
Yeah, for sure. Let's shift gears. I want to talk a little bit about why you started the Dharma group, what Dharma is, and why you started it.
yeah, you know the name. Everybody's like, what does that mean? You know, the concept of dharma is kind of an Eastern religion sort of thing. It basically boils down to in Hinduism and Buddhism what you're meant to do, and what you're supposed to do. You know, if you were born to be a farmer, that is your dharma. That is your calling, right? Um, you know what I've felt when I started that was it was my calling to help provide uh, provide good food for necessary needs, right? You know, essentially what we do is I do a couple of projects with like, waffles and some other stuff, but the core of what I do at Dharma Food Group is food for people that need it and medically tailored food. So generally, most of what I'm doing now are medically tailored meals for um, uh, diabetes, for renal failure, for heart conditions. And I've got a whole network. I think we're up to 92 SKUs now of prepared meals that we develop menus that target um, specific ailments and for post acute discharge. So what I do is I work with agencies and private label these meals for them. So you won't be able to go anywhere and see a Dharma Food Group meal. So I will work with, if it's XYZ insurance company, we'll make the XYZ insurance company meals, but we will make them specifically tailored to a particular need. So it's we do pureed meals for people with dysphagia that they can't swallow. We do a lot of mechanically soft meals for people that have difficulty chewing. A lot of those type of meals. I develop all that myself. I do a lot of the nutritional work myself. I nerd out on software to do that. I also employ a dietitian that does a lot of that sort of thing. So essentially, I will come up with all these meals that will work for for different ailments. We'll sell them to these agencies. They send me an order, and I work with a couple of co-packers to make the product. So, um, I really enjoy that kind of work. We were really busy during COVID, incredibly
Mm-hmm.
busy during COVID, and it slowed down a little bit now because some of the funding isn't there like it was, but we're still doing 150,000 meals a month, which is a good number, and we're feeding a lot of people in across the country, involved in different programs, and I also am doing child nutrition programs with that. So I've taken some of the meals that were appropriate for seniors and kind of made them more kid centric, but they're still healthy meals that will meet the uh, National School Breakfast Program and National School Lunch Program requirements. And so we're doing frozen meals for districts that will do send home meals for in the summertime, or in certain districts where you've got a high percentage of children that are on free lunch, they will send home a frozen meal with that child because they may not have nutritional support at home. So, I am working with that, that kind of a market. Luckily, I'm surrounded by a lot of really good people, and we've been doing it so long that the framework is kind of laid for that, so it doesn't take up all my time. So, so I do packaging equipment like we talked about. Also, run a 501c3 Christian food ministry. Where if I have surplus goods that I can come up with, where somebody says, "Hey, we've got 3,000 pounds of this product that we've discontinued," I'll work on getting that to agencies in need and churches in need. And just really want to be able to to work to make sure that the most vulnerable people, our seniors and our kids, have access to good nutrition, because a lot of times they don't.
Yeah. No, I love it. I got a lot of questions popping in my head. What does the R&D process look like when you're developing these meals, especially with all the specialty diets? What's kind of, you have something brand new, XYZ client says we need these type of
Mhm.
meals. Like kind of walk through, what does that R&D process actually look like?
You know what I typically do is I think about who the end user is going to be, right? So if an agency, like, say I had, I'll just make up a Meals on Wheels of Seattle, right? If they called me and said, hey, we want some meals for our senior population, I will look, and number one, I'll ask them some demographics about who they're feeding, right? Because people in Seattle are going to eat different meals than people in Alabama, for instance. Something. If I sent biscuits and gravy to Seattle, they're going to be like, "What is this?" Right? So we'll look at the demographics, look at the age. I'll look at some of the local cuisine, and I'll go to the internet and just say, okay, what was some of the more popular dishes in the 1970s in the Pacific Northwest? Because you got to think, people eat with their memory, right? We always want comfort food, which is what we had when we were kids. And if it turns out that, one of the greatest, dishes was, ham and pineapple fried rice, so, I'm just making something up, I will start with that. And then, we'll take, and I'll just make some notes. Okay, here are some flavors that I think are going to work, that people are going to enjoy. And then I basically, go to the kitchen and say, okay, we want to make this sauce. I'll look around online and find a couple of, sketches of kind of what that could be. And then just go to the kitchen and, and start playing around with it until I find something that's going to be nutritionally adequate, but also taste good. And sometimes I'll go and, bam, it's great. It's first time. That's awesome. Sometimes I'll work on it for a month. It's just like anytime you're developing a recipe. And I do that kind of client specific. I do a lot of work down in Miami, so I had to, so we're doing picadillo, and we're doing arroz con pollo and all this, Cuban style stuff, and putting plantains and senior meals, which I thought would never happen, but we want to be able to have meals that people enjoy. So that's kind of the R&D process. Is I'll start with, okay, who's getting it, and then what would they like, and then luckily I've been doing this 20 years now, so sometimes the R&D process is I just look back at my file and what I did in 2012 I've got a formula for. But if I've got to start from scratch, I just go in the kitchen, put on my headphones, turn on some tunes, and start cooking. Write everything down, and until I've got it to where I want it, and then I will take and put everything in my software. I use NutriCoster. I've got a huge database in NutriCoster, and it'll say, okay, well, here's all the ingredients, here's the process, here's the nutritional. Does it work? Most of the time, yes, because I've been doing it a long time. Sometimes it doesn't. I got to scrap it and go back to the drawing board. So, but once I've got a single meal done, generally everything I do is in a 7-pack. So I'll develop an entire menu. Generally for a particular client, I'll usually do about 28 meals. So it won't be they're not eating the same thing over and over.
Right.
That'll give them 4 weeks to have any repeats, and just go to the kitchen, develop it, and then work with the co-packer to launch it. Um, you know, Luckily, I work with some really good packers where if I take a recipe, I've got a template that I put it in where it automatically can scale. Um, I put in what my original batch was in grams, and then I can scale it to 50 pounds or 5,000 pounds or however we want it. And I'd utilize percentages to do that. So there's a lot of nerd math involved in the recipe part, but generally you turn that recipe into a math equation, do everything with weight. So, and so I just figure out, it's got 0.17% salt, it's got 2.24%
Hmm.
oregano, and that's how we scale it. And so we very seldom when we're doing a launch have any kind of an issue or mishap. Once it's in black and white, you've got a good spec. You just go to market with it.
Yeah. Two tips for people at home.
Mhm.
Weigh your ingredients. It's so much more accurate
Always.
and 10 times easier to do a recipe. And two, use the metric system. I fought the metric system for so long. And just recently, I've been doing some R&D and I was like, I can't do this. I cannot keep converting everything
Mhm.
in ounces to pound. It just became a logistical nightmare. Switched over to the
Yep.
metric and I'm like, why have I never been using the metric system my entire life? I just fought it and fought it. It's mind
Oh
changing.
yeah, brother. If you can count to 10, you can do the metric system. I mean, that's and it really helps. It helps you, especially when you're doing small things. If you're doing an R&D batch, you might have, 3/4 of a gram of turmeric in something, and
Yep.
I mean, if I ever got pulled over, they'd probably think I was dealing drugs. I got a bunch of scales and and stuff in the back of
Yep.
my car. But I mean, that's just the kind of doing an R&D. You turn that recipe into a math equation, and you can scale it up or scale it down. And so we've, I feel like we've have done a good job understanding that market and making meals for it. Of course, I'd love to sell more meals, but we'll uh, it'll come when it comes. I feel blessed that we're doing what we're doing.
I think once people can get out of their head, if they can find the right people in the industry to do the meals, because there's such a misconception of it's a frozen meal, so it must taste like
Hmm.
dog shit,
Yeah.
right? Like that's just the conception is I see a frozen tray, it's got to taste like crap, which it doesn't have to taste like
Yeah.
crap if you have the right ingredients, fresh ingredients. People don't understand that a lot of your vegetables have the most nutrients when they're blast frozen fresh
Hmm.
from pick because you're locking in that, but they just think, it's a frozen vegetable, so it must taste like crap. And they think that it has to be pulled straight out of the garden and into their mouth for it to taste good. And I don't think that's the case, especially like we've talked about with the technology,
Hmm.
with being able to change the atmosphere, locking it in, quick freezing. There's so many things that we can do rather than putting in preservatives, which we've done for so long to prolong that food life. That if people could get it out of their head, then they would maybe look at it a little different. Of oh my god, this is going to taste like crap.
Yeah, and one thing that I do in all of our meals is I don't process any of the vegetables. They go in there basically individually, quick frozen and raw into there. So the first time that it's really cooked is when it's microwaved or when it's popped in the oven. So you maintain the texture, you maintain the moisture. You know the there's not a you can't sell these meals for $10 or $12 a piece. I mean they're inexpensive meals, so we've got to stay within that framework. But I mean you can get good, nutritious, good tasting meals, and by utilizing smart packaging technology, smart processing technology, you can do a great meal for not a whole lot of money, and be able to provide nutritional support. You just have to. But it's funny whenever I've even had a couple of agencies try our meals and say, "Hey, these are too good." We're used to getting this chopped and formed chicken, and with all of our meals, we take chicken trim when they cut the Chick-fil-A chicken piece out, all the leftovers, we cook it in a kettle.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's all white meat, pulled chicken. And some folks are like, how do you do this and do it, you know, cost effectively? I'm like, well, it took a lot of learning, but we do. And you know, and the packaging, helps preserve it to get it to the to get it to the end user, whether we're doing it refrigerated or frozen, because we do some of both.
Right. 100%. I absolutely love it. I think it's just that's why I have these conversations to educate the general public
Mm-hmm.
about what's available because I don't, again, people just don't know what's out there because they never had the exposure or there's just no one talking about it. It's always kind of in the background. If somebody does it and they learn somehow
Yeah.
and they put it together, but what you do is truly special. How do people find you? How do they find your organization? I think that's incredible what you do with
Mm-hmm.
taking food and getting it out. Where do people go?
Dharmafoodgroup.com is my website. You can contact me through there, um, or christianfoodministry.com. I haven't done a whole lot with it just because I've been working on starting a nonprofit is a lot of red tape. So I finally got that up and going and starting to work with some agencies there. But also, people in the industry, one of the main reasons that I wanted to talk to is in addition to my work with Dharma Food Group, I also am a representative for ILPRA, out of Italy that manufactures packaging machines to do all this modified atmosphere and vacuum skin pack. So you can contact me via my Dharma Food Group website if you want to know about the packaging equipment. I can get back with you. But I've worked with Roberts Technology Group out of Philadelphia, where we represent all that equipment. And the way I got to know these guys is by utilizing the equipment and by getting to know them. And they said, hey, you know more about this stuff, and you're a real big nerd about this stuff. Why don't you come work with us? So, anybody that wants to know more about the packaging technology, we can have a conversation about that and be glad to help. And I also, if you have some folks that you mentioned, the Haccp programs and food safety programs, we touched on that a little bit earlier. If you're like a meal prep operator or a restaurant operator and want to understand how to do even modified atmosphere or do tray packaging on a small scale, one of the services that I offer for people that I help with packaging equipment with their packaging is I can provide draft food safety programs for even restaurants. So if you need to have a critical control point program, a GMP program, standard operating procedures, sanitation procedures, I've got all of that lined out in a draft format where it's not as scary once it's been put together and vetted, and I can kind of help people with their food safety plans as well. So
love it. Absolutely. We'll put all this in the show notes so that way people have links. They can get to everything pretty easy and quickly. Any last closing words before we wrap up?
No, man, I just appreciate you having me. I probably talked your ear off, but I'm really passionate about this sort of thing, about food in general, about the technology of food and about the future of making people healthier by utilizing a better system. So I appreciate you getting the word out.
Yeah. Thanks, Shane, for being on. I know it's been a long time coming. I'm excited we were able to chat, and I know there's probably a lot more conversations in our future as we've been talking. I've got some things rolling around in my head that we can talk about later. So if you want to know what he's doing, again, we'll put everything in the show notes. But until next time, we'll catch you on the sunny side.